when we talk about the American community, in specific when we talk about the indigenous community, in specific when we talk about the black community and the Latino community, what has been lost with regard to the deen in the last 20 years in the shade of the Salafi Da'wah? Listen to this, quotations. In the shade of the Salafi Da'wah as it was communicated by those who took the responsibility or were recognized as leadership in the groups that were doing da'wah. Notice that. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying in the shade of those who engage. What was lost at the end of the day? This is not the place to go into all of the details of positives and negatives and this and that. But one thing I will say is this, that at the end of the day, when you look at the indigenous community across the nation, the amount of masajid that the indigenous community has is few. The amount of masajid that the indigenous community has with regard to being established, educational centers, community centers, social service centers, dealing with the issues of the people. Because remember that the Salaf established Bayt al-Mal, they established services for the community. They just didn't only call the people to Tawheed, right? If Mu'adh bin Jabal was sent to Yemen, was he only sent to call the people to Tawheed? Or did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam give him a methodology? And eventually, some point in there, Mu'adh bin Jabal is being told, if they obey you in this, if they obey you in this, we get to the issue of zakat. So if there's an issue of zakat, that means that the poor are being taken care of. That means there's issues of economy, business transactions. That means there has to be some fiqh of the deen. It's not an issue that you just go open up a store in the inner city and you're slinging crack, or you're slinging heroin, or you're selling pork, or you're doing stick-ups and robbing people, and then you come to the masjid and you're giving your 2.5 on zakat. It doesn't work like that. You're not on the corner of the block, getting rid of weight. You're not on the corner of the block making sure the Jamaicans don't take over, or you plotting to take over where the Puerto Ricans are selling. This is the type of stuff that goes on in the inner city. That's not how zakat is built. Zakat is not built on that type of concept. Zakat is built on the understanding that the Muslims, how they engage in business transactions, there's rules to that, right? It's not just a free-for-all. So you see the reality of da'wah, that Mu'adh is being sent to his people, teach Tawheed, and then what? And then if they obey you in this, you teach them that they have other obligations. And that's what we find in the Hadith of Jibreel, right? In other words, teach them Islam. So from there, we get this understanding, right, that what has happened is that within the indigenous community, we've reached a point at which the infrastructure that was built by different groups that they were searching for Islam, they may not have had a sound knowledge on everything, but they had enough knowledge to understand that there was a necessity to build institutions. Those gains that were made, a lot of them, those gains have been lost. Even in environments in which it was known that, the Muslims should have community, that they should have housing, they should create some sort of marketplace, that they should have educational services, that type of thing. In those places where that was taking place, I know a community here in Ohio where there was once apartment building, property ownership, school, masjid, people living around the masjid, poof, is gone, right? And so that's just an example. And so across the country, what you have seen is that the indigenous community, at one time, it was moving towards building institutions. That's not to say that everything was perfect, ideal, on point, prior to the Salafi Da'wah, because it wasn't. But what we have lost is the understanding of the obligation to build community, the obligation to serve community, the obligation to maintain our institutions, the obligation to uphold some sort of dignity. And what has happened in the community is a lot of back and forth. And a lot of this, at the end of the day, comes back to one major issue. People just didn't, no matter how much sincerity that they had no real plan of how to move forward that you can see it has materialized now. And there was no continuing education. There was no educational aspirations from the angle of, okay, we talk Quran and Sunnah as being the priority. Okay, so where are the institutions to teach Quran and Sunnah? In the last 20 years, we should have seen at least like 5 institutions built solely to teach Quran and Sunnah. Right? Memorization of the Quran, Islamic sciences, Hadith, solely for that reason. So that's one of the issues, that we've lost a sense of community, a sense of ourselves, a sense of responsibility, a sense of dignity in being able to stand on our own. And we have collapsed our own concept of leadership, even to the point where we doubt whether someone can be called sheikh or imam or this and that. And some of that is with good cause and some of it is not. Some of it is extremely problematic. No community exists in the dunya like that. That the only people that are called mashaykh are the people from another place. No community exists like that except here in the U.S. Right? That type of undermining of authority, it gives the ability to do whatever you want. We understand that there's some qualification issues and we understand the details of all that. But okay, all of that aside. So now we go into the third phase. First phase was the issue of Islam being revealed in history and time and place to humanity, and it's something that can be practiced. It's something that speaks to the time period of the people, their needs, that type of thing. Second phase was a reflection on, the whole loss of the sense of community building, sense of dignity, the sense of responsibility to the community, sense of leadership, and the demise of the masajid now that were, that were basically controlled by the indigenous community. The numbers have decreased dramatically. We have a major crisis on our hands with regard to that. And also the splintering of the community in 1,000 different ways. Burnouts, so on and so forth. A lot of issues with that. Breakups, a lot of division. And okay, so then we move to the other phase now. The third phase is that, okay, when we talk about the da'wah of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, rahmatullahi alayh, one thing that you have to understand is that Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, leave aside all the conspiratorial stuff, but it's a fact that the British Empire, it had infiltrated the Muslim world. Right, it had infiltrated Africa, was now termed as the Middle East, had infiltrated. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt that the British Empire had some hand in assisting the Saudis, in assisting the situation in Philistine, creating the problem as it is. There's no doubt about that. But regardless of all of that, at the end of the day, there was something that was called the Ottoman Empire. And at the end of the day, there was something that it can be said for the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire declined on a lot of different levels. The Saudis by themselves, as a political force that arose in the Hijaz, from out of Najd, were not enough to give a blow to the Ottoman Empire. They contributed it to the whole reality. But we have to admit that Kemal Ataturk, as a leader, in the Turkish Empire, he contributed as well. He secularized Turkey, he nationalized Turkey, and he abolished the Khilafah. So that was part of it. There's a lot of different factors, to the decline of the Muslims politically and economically, and as a presence on the world global scene. But the Da'wah of Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab was some sort of effort to safeguard Deen and establish Deen in that community that he was in. That's not the only effort. You had the effort of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio. You had the effort of Shah Waliullah. You had the effort of Shawkani, and Amir Sana'ani and all of that crew that was in Yemen. You had a number of different movements all over the Muslim world that everybody was trying to engage this whole question of what do we do with the decline of the Muslim community. So Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab is not a prophet, right? He's a teacher. Some of them call him a reviver. He revived some aspects. You know, he did bring back, between him and the House of Saud, they brought back the Hanbali madhab with some strength, you know, and they brought back aspects of the deen. There's no doubt about that, and also caused problems, just like other people cause problems as well. Muhammad Abdul, he brought back some aspects of the deen. Sheikh Muhammad Abdul from Al-Azhar from Egypt, and also he caused some problems when it came to some understandings. But Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he is not a prophet. He's a scholar. And he's a scholar not equal to Ibn Taymiyyah, right? Not equal to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, but he's a scholar that has a certain type of program, certain mentality. So in the midst of all this decline, Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he looks at certain issues. Mind you, the reason why I keep mentioning Ibn Taymiyyah is because he tries to base himself off of Ibn Taymiyyah. And so one of the things that he did do is bring back to the fore the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn Taymiyyah's role historically is debatable, right? Meaning how much impact he had in the past. I think the impact that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has, we feel it more today than it was felt in the past, right? And that's not taking away anything from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. It means that sometimes you give certain things more emphasis in one time period than you do in another time period. Right, and that's just a reality. He was there, he was a voice, but I think that now we can appreciate Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's works more than maybe in the past, because maybe in the past he didn't have as much respect and regard. You know, that happens historically. Sometimes the genius type of concept is discovered after the fact, just like the artist is not appreciated till after the artist dies. That's kind of a concept that's there. But Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he looks at his situation and he looks for certain practices that he looks at, and he looks at the issue that those practices need to be corrected. This was something that was taking place in India, something that was taking place in Egypt, it was taking place throughout in Africa, other places of Africa, outside of Egypt. You know, people were looking at why did the Muslims decline, and we need to reform our behaviors. We need to reform practices that are not from the deen and come into a practice of the deen. So Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he leaned in that direction. And so some of the things that he focused on were things that were what? Things that were acceptable in the Ottoman Empire. And so Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, one of the things that he did, in reading Ibn Taymiyyah, he came up with a concept of establishing a political order. Listen to me. He came up with the idea of establishing a political order that will support the practice of the deen. And so the concept of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi was that the scholars should align themselves with political leadership or power, and the two should complement each other. And that's what happened. The house or the family of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab took on the religious leadership, and then the tribe of Saud, they took on the political leadership, and that's how Saudi Arabia emerged. The book of Tawheed basically was a manifesto arguing that certain practices were problematic in the environment of the Hijaz, which ultimately will mean that they would have to assert some sort of authority, they would have to resort to some sort of power struggle in order to establish what they wanted to establish in the book of Tawheed. And so then eventually they break from the Ottoman Empire, you know, and part of the concept was, you know, struggling against the Ottoman Empire, you have to have some sort of legitimacy because you're going against the political leadership of the time, the Khalifa of the time. So part of it was to delegitimize the leadership from the angle of, look at what's in the environment. There's a decline in the deen, and there's practices of bid'ah, practices even they considered shirk. And so we have the right to establish a cleaner understanding of the deen. That was the concept that was it. And so the point of the book of Tawheed is that it's making an argument for why the people of Najd and the Hijaz should establish their own community in practicing the deen and have some sort of sovereignty right? And so that was the struggle that took place in phases. It didn't take place just at one time. It took place in phases. What's the point of this? That the book of Tawhid is speaking to the reality and the context of what was taking place in the Hijaz. And what was the argument that the Mashaykh of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, meaning his family as being a people of ilm and so on and so forth, what they had as a concept of what the deen should be as far as established in practice, and the House of Saud. And so the concept of the book of Tawheed is that it established for the people of the Hijaz, in specific for those who came from Najd, in specific for the House of Saud and the house of Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahab. That's why they say, Yani Ali Sheikh, the family of the Sheikh. You know, some people are called the family of the Sheikh. They're referring to Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahab, or the Mujaddid, they say, the reviver. And so then, it's not uncommon that Aqidah books will deal with certain situations, like Usul al-Sunnah. Usul al-Sunnah by Imam Ahmed rahmatullahi alayhi. It's not dealing with every issue in Aqidah. That's why in Usul al-Sunnah there's no talk of Asma'i wa Sifat and detail and all of that type of stuff. It's dealing with certain key issues. Because books of Aqidah usually deal with key issues that are taking place in a particular time period. The Rasail or the epistles or the letters of Ibn Taymiyyah to people, many of them like Aqidah Tahawiyya or Aqidah Hamawiyya or Aqidah Tadmuriyya, and a series of other books that he wrote, Al-Isfahaniyya and all of that type of stuff. You know, a lot of those books are addressing issues, questions that people have with regard to belief in their context, in their situation, in their time period. And so that's how a lot of Aqidah Tahawiyya is the same thing. Aqidah Tahawiyya is addressing, you know, what the community is believing, and part of it is dealing with issues at that time period. Part of it is dealing with the debates that are there. When we see Risala ila Ahl al-Thaqr by Shaykh al-Islam Abu Hassan al-Ashari. Abu Hassan al-Ashari at one time was Mu'tazila. And then, you know, there in Risala ila Ahl al-Thaqr or Al-Ibana, those books, you see that he switches. He's more authority in his approach. And so he's dealing with issues that come up in his time period that were discussed in the community. You know, even the whole question of the Mu'tazila, you know, that comes up is about issues as a group. They're dealing with issues that come up in their time period. They were actually, Mu'tazila were a group of people that were actually having discussions with the people of the book and the philosophers and others. And they took a certain approach on how to deal with it, which is not the approach of the people of the Sunnah, but it is an approach. So that was the standard across the board. The standard across the board, that Aqidah books were written dealing with the context of the people and issues that came up. So there's no difference with the book of Tawhid. And so then the issue comes up in Aqidah studies. Okay, so now how are you dealing with deen in your environment? How are you dealing with the context of the issues in your environment? Issues such as belief in nubuwwah, belief in prophets or prophethood, or belief in the Quran revelation, or belief in Allah, the issue of atheism and all that, or agnosticism, or any of the new schools of thought that have emerged which cause doubt on the issue of Tawhid. We don't find that many people are dealing with those issues. And so then, you know, Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab rahmatullahi, he pretty much did a service to his community, right? Whether we like it or not, whether we're pro or against, he did a service to his community. That's a sociological fact. You know, he was able to align himself with those people who were able to harness power. They were able to create a political environment for themselves. And now, you know, the Saudi Arabia controls oil. It controls, or to some extent, you know, it controls some land. And it's not the only tribe that's there in that area. There's other tribes in Jazan and all of that in Saudi Arabia. There's other tribes that exist in Saudi Arabia as a whole. But they were able to achieve something for their people. And so then that becomes the problem with the contemporary Salafi Da'wah in the U.S. What are you achieving for your people? I'm not saying you go out there and you take the same steps that Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahhab took because he launched a revolt against the political authorities of his time. He launched an uprising rebellion. They came to power by the sword, like it or not. You can't deny history. That's just a reality. But as far as Aqidah servicing the people, that's the question. Book of Tawheed is not the book of Tawheed. The book of Tawheed is the Quran. It's the book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Right? The book of Tawheed is the book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But the whole concept that you see in the book of Tawheed, compiled by Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahab rahmatullahi alayhi, is the idea of addressing issues in his community with pertaining to Aqidah. And so that's the challenge of the contemporary Dawah efforts. Not only the Salafis, right? That's the same issues with those who are claiming to be Ash'ari and Maturidi and all of that. They claim to be rational. They claim to have rational proofs and proofs from the Quran and Sunnah. And in the midst of this, people have issues with Dawkins. They have issues with all of these different madhahib, and they don't know how to deal with it. There's a lot of intellectual confusion. So Aqidah studies in that regard is in a state of crisis. People don't really understand how to deal with Aqidah studies. Aqidah studies is not something that's frozen in the past, like what was said by some sheikh, may Allah have mercy on him, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. Everything that person said is relevant for today. Like that's revelation. It doesn't work like that. The revelation is the book and the sunnah, the Quran and the sunnah. The ijtihadat of the ulama, sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't apply, right? And so that's just a reality. And so at the end of the day, the core of Tawheed remains the same and so on and so forth. But if Aqidah studies are not dealing with the issues of the people, like for instance, we could raise a question. Is addiction in today's time a form of shirk? Because addiction, ارتباط الناس بالأشياء, the رابط بين الشيئين, شخص وشيء, the attachment that a person, an individual will have with a thing, sometimes it will get to a point of junoon, insanity. And we can't say that it's completely excusable always. But sometimes addiction reaches a point where a person will do everything for that thing, right? And do everything, sacrifice time, self, money, everything. So is it a form of shirk? Possible. We're not dealing with that type of stuff. The idea that people think they know everything. They're the source of knowledge. They're the source of understanding. They're the source of right and wrong. That's an Aqidah issue. It's not being dealt with in today's time. So Aqidah studies, they come and they deal with the reality of the people in the community. If it's not that, then that means that people they're not understanding the objectives of Aqidah study. They're not understanding the objectives of Dawah. And so that's the crisis in the contemporary Salafi Dawah right now, is that, they don't understand. There's other books that are better to teach from with the same Aqidah, like Ma'arij al-Qabul. There's other books to teach Aqidah from. Look at a book like the 77 branches of Iman, by Imam al-Bayhaqi, which was abridged by Sheikh al-Qazwini, rahmatullahi alayhim. That book is a much more bright, in the sense that it's a book of Aqidah. There's not issues of debate in it. It's a book of Aqidah which teaches you about life, teaches you about beauty, teaches you about Allah, your responsibilities to other people, where you should be with yourself. It teaches you that the whole of the deen is tied into belief, and it makes you a person that, we're obligated to better ourselves. That's another factor, that the hadith of Jibreel teaches us that part of the deen is the purification of the self. The issue of ihsan comes back also to the issue of tazkiyat al-nafs, purification of the heart, purification of the self. And so that has been a missing factor in the way that Dawah has been, engaged. So, that the Quran sometimes indicates that some of us will follow our desires, and we will make our desires like God, like an object of worship. May Allah forgive us and protect us from our very selves and from the whisperings of shaitan. It's a reality. Again, we indicated to that issue with the point of addiction. But tazkiyat al-nafs has to come into the teaching of Aqidah. And there's a lot of issues, like for instance in the Salafi Da'wah, the really teachings of Ibn al-Qayyim when it comes to the heart, when it comes to being a better person spiritually, that was kind of left out. People have stayed focused on certain books in Aqidah. Even with the issue of Kitab al-Tawheed, really the issue has become, the Sunan al-Barbahari. And Imam al-Barbahari is known who he is, rahmatullahi alayhi. He was, a very distinct Hanbali scholar. He was very sharp at the tongue. And he was very strong against those who opposed him. So there's a character issue there too. Like I follow the Prophet Muhammad. We follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's like, scholars, we love them and this, that, but they don't take precedence to the example and the model of the one who was sent by Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. You don't have a hujjah for that. You don't have a proof against that point, in other words. That there's someone that can come and take the place of the model of the Prophet Muhammad with regard to compassion, with regard to da'wah, dealing with the people, or the companions themselves, with regard to the issue of da'wah and so on and so forth. So scholars we take and some things we take from and some things we reject, but not everybody's on that level. That's the problem of education that we talked about before. How to use the tools that the scholars give us in their writings and their teachings. Not everyone is on that level. And that's the problem of not investing in education. Muslim community is one of the communities that invest the least in leadership and in education compared to the other communities here from the people of the book and other religions. Imams are the least paid, least stable. Rabbis are the most paid, 6-figure salaries. That's why those communities flourish. And that's not to say that I'm advocating six-figure salaries for imams. That's not the point. The point being stability, investment. So at the end of the day, Aqidah studies that don't deal with the reality of the community and don't deal with the issues that the people are going through in the now really are not fulfilling their function and their role. If Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, whether we agree with him or not, address what he felt was the issues of his people, and then we can't say, Aqidah is not political. Man, they launched a political movement. That was a political movement. They went up against the leader of the time and established a government. I don't think that gets more political than that. Even if in the book of Tawheed, there's no direct relationship to politics, it is at the end of the day. Because when they're talking about certain actions, those were actions that were allowable in the ultimate empire. That's not to say that we agree with them. Certain things that are talked against in the book of Tawheed, it becomes a manifesto. The book of Tawheed becomes a manifesto for delegitimizing the authority of the Ottoman Empire in the Hijaz. And why a case is made for establishing the deen. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And again, this is not to knock Muhammad Abdul Wahhab or to be pro Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, or this is the issue. We're talking about something more serious than that. The issue of taking care of our people. The issue of the deen speaking to the conditions of our people. We're talking about the issues of understanding the efficacy of Islam. Right? The efficacy of Islam is important. Islam is viable as a way of life. We don't have issues with Islam. If we have issues with people, we have issues with ideas, but not with Islam. That's kufr. If we have issues with Islam, we have a problem with ourselves that we have to work through. A person can have a doubt, okay, fine. We're not going to take them out of the deen for that, but we're obligated to work through the issues. We're obligated to work through the issues, right? And so then that's where the deen has to be efficacious. And it is. The deen is efficacious. It's us that we're lacking in our ability to be able to translate and articulate how it is that the deen works. It's not all 100% our fault. The Muslim world is in that crisis overall. Don't think that it's us here in the U.S. only. No. Muslim world is in a crisis, right? Because of the lack of investment. There's a sort of attempts to revive, like Saudi Arabia for a while was dumping money into scholarship, and they kind of now they're putting it in other areas like science and all, and so now they're trying to kind of deal with more contemporary issues. Turkey now, before they were putting money into like the, medicine and engineering and math and all that type of stuff. And now they're trying to put more money into the whole idea of building imams and schools to study Sharia. So Malaysia is more balanced, in that regard. They put money into the education on the sciences of Islam and the sciences that are necessary to take our place in the dunya as human beings. Do we want to be, the ones that are always behind on every technology? Shouldn't we be at the forefront somewhere? At least in medicine, right? After all, we produce a lot of doctors and engineers. Shouldn't we be the ones that dominate in those fields? That's not the mentality of the Muslims. The mentality of the Muslims is very laid back. We're not the ones that are discovering in the dunya. We're not the ones that are going, exploring under the earth. We're not the ones that are transforming things. So that means we don't understand the Quranic imperative of our responsibility in the dunya. Then, there's another factor that the Quran teaches us too, that everyone is not going to be empowered in civilization perpetually in the dunya. Everyone gets their share. But as Muslims, historically, everywhere that the Muslims went, civilization arose, except for the US. That's the problem that we have. Everywhere Islam went, any country, it didn't remain backward culturally, civilizationally, intellectually. Did it? We didn't have that problem. We had a problem with big heads. The Mu'tazila were big heads. They were like intellectual Nazis. That they forced their position. And we have that sometimes in Islamic history, that we have groups that try to force their position. But reason was never a problem for the Muslims. Muslims always opened the door to reason. The problem for the Muslims was an exaggeration reason, unlike Christianity. But the point is this, that everywhere Islam went, historically, those people materially became successful. And that's another issue, that, historically, Muslims became successful. They forgot their deen. And so, but the deen teaches us balance. The deen teaches us balance. But for us in the US, we have to learn how to operate with our deen. Our deen is not our enemy, is our companion, is our safeguard, is what will uplift us, is our shelter of dignity, is what will uphold us as human beings. And that's why it deserves more from us than what we actually give it. And I'm not saying that to lord over anyone like I'm perfect or saying, that's not what I'm saying. We have to be in a situation where we come to an understanding of how to work with the deen. It's like having the best cell phone on earth and not knowing how to use it. You can do so many things with it, but you don't know how to work with it. Or the best piece of technology, and the only thing you do, is you just use one aspect. And that's kind of where we're at with the deen. We have the best deen, but we're only just focused on certain aspects, and not even those have we mastered. And so we end with that, with saying that Aqidah studies, at the end of the day, it has to relate to the situation of the people, right? It has to end with the situation of the people. And we as a community cannot marginalize our issues. Because when you marginalize your issues, what you do is you alienate yourself from the deen. You have to have some way to relate to Islam. Islam speaks to you. That's why the Prophet Muhammad was sent to all of humanity. He wasn't sent so that it's like we're watching a conversation between other communities. Islam, how does it speak to the Turks? Islam, how does it speak to the Egyptians? Islam, how does it speak to the Saudi Arabians? Yeah, Islam, how does it speak to the Uzbekis? And we're just sitting in the spotlight. We're sitting in the bleachers watching the whole event. We never ask, Islam, how does it speak to you? In Cleveland, Ohio, in Brooklyn, New York, in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., or any part of the world that you're in which the Muslims are living in similar conditions that we live. How does Islam speak to you, to your family, to your situation? And if we don't have that mentality of understanding that, we always feel outside. And that's what's happening to our children. Islam is alienating. Islam is a feeling of alienation. When it comes to the Quran, most of us don't understand even the Fatiha properly. I'm not saying even how to recite, but I'm saying the meaning, the impact, because Arabic is not part of the deal for us. When it comes to understanding the deen, it doesn't go beyond the basics. So there's a major disconnect. We're in a situation now which is very similar to what happened with the Catholics and Latin, that their worship was in Latin. And the people would just sit there, sit there like, oh, all right, is this over? Okay, mashallah. So we have reverence without fiqh, without understanding, without comprehension. That's not good. Or we have rote memory without comprehending how that stuff applies. So at the end of the day, we leave it with that. We have to have a balance. Aqidah has to be accompanied with purification of the heart, good character, community building, community service. Aqidah studies should deal with uplifting the community. And at the end of the day, we have to build the leadership which is sound. It's not to knock anyone that came before, but it's to say that, okay, we have the experience now. Past 20 years, what are we going to wait for? A whole generation, to see the mistakes and how to correct them? No, we need to learn that Islamic sciences are viable. The deen of Islam is viable. Is that we have some issues. And these issues will not be solved by scholars from overseas in entirety. Some of them will be able to assist us. Some of them will get dirty with us. And many of them will not, because they have to deal with their own issues. They can't even deal sometimes with the issues in their own societies. Go to a Yemeni sheikh. Well, Yemen now is messed up. May Allah bless them. But go to a Yemeni sheikh who's used to seeing his tribe, meaning his cousin's family and his uncle's family, his brother's family, his son's family. And they have 3 wives here, 4 wives here, 2 wives here. They live in a village together. They work together. They all speak the same language. They all have the same culture. And go explain to him, go ask him, what do you do with the family in which the brother came from a divorced family? He's Muslim, but his family is not Muslim. He married a sister who was raised by her stepfather, right? And he had a child by her. And then she took the child and she put him in court for child support. Another brother came in and he's raising the child. And how do you deal with that situation? They look at you and they're like, and I've taken a case to an Egyptian sheikh and a Yemeni sheikh, and they're like, these things happen? That's where they're at. They can't comprehend. So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he said that the faqih or the mufti should be from the people themselves. And so we have a lot of work to do. Social services, we have a lot of empowerment work to do. And we have a double jeopardy situation. Double jeopardy, what is it? That the sciences, you can go get a degree for social work, counseling, this and that. That stuff doesn't apply to us. It applies to white society. We don't even exist in the society. Indigenous people don't exist really in the society. Most of the stuff is not even applicable to us. So we have work to do on that front, the liberation front, and then we have work to do on the front of knowledge of the deen and how to apply it. We have a lot of work to do. We don't have time to be arguing with each other. We only have time to really try to figure out how to work out our existence, how to empower our people, how to deal with our situations, how to safeguard our families. We don't have time for any other sidetrack type of situation. We don't have time to be concerned with this or that. That's useless. That's not part of the priorities. Yani, we have something in the deen. I definitely want to end with this. It's called wajib al-waqt in fiqh al-awlawiyat. Right? Wajib al-waqt is what is the obligation of the moment. Right? Safeguarding our families. We're losing, we're in the process of state of emergency, almost genocide. Then the other issue is the fiqh of priorities. Wudu comes before salah if you need to make wudu. If the time is about to go out of dhuhr, you have to pray dhuhr. You don't pray sunnahs. That's how it works. There's a priority to acts. And so the time sometimes will dictate what the priority is. And so the priority right now is that we safeguard our families and ourselves. And that's not going to be done solely with just sitting and teaching Tawheed. If that was the case, Mu'adh bin Jabal, radiyallahu anhu, would not have been sent by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to his people. And he was told, teach them Tawheed. But, once that's basically clear for them, obligate them to Salah. Once they accept in that, obligate them to zakat, so on and so forth, to the arkan of the deen, till the deen is practiced. And again, like we said, can you actually practice zakat without economy, homie? Can you practice zakat with brothers on the street selling dope, doing stick-ups? Can that the zakat money is going to come from that? Brothers unemployed? You know, can you practice zakat when majority of your people are in a position of only taking zakat? You know, with the wealth gap. And then people say that the wealth gap is not valid, or they say generational wealth is not an issue. Inheritance in Islam, Quran, Sunnah, remember we followed that? There's examples in which some companions were forbidden by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from giving away all of their wealth so that their families wouldn't stay in poverty and be with the, you know, handout type of thing. And even then, the companions established Baytul Mal, which is a social security system. So if there was poor in the community, they took, you know, from the needs. They took for their needs from the community money. And even natural resources, the community shared the wealth in that. You know, and so there's a lot of stuff that we have to learn from Islam for ourselves. I'm talking about so that it applies to our lives. May Allah forgive me for my mistakes and aid us and help us especially in the state of emergency that we're in. Safeguard our tawheed and allow us to die in the state of Islam. And at least we ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to allow us to safeguard the generations, you know, and stop the process of genocide that's taking place and destroying our communities. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.